Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? Subscriptions to streaming music services like Spotify and Apple Music are continuing to increase. By far, those are very popular ways to enjoy and listen to music. And right along with that, sales of vinyl records are at their highest levels in decades. Wait, what? Woohoo! It is super cold outside, so here we go. This episode's a little bit of a follow-up to a previous one where I talked about how digital music, MP3s, in some ways could be argued to be killing the kind of hi-fi experience, the enjoyment of just sitting down and listening to music. And I really pinned a lot of that or made the case of it being just that music is so convenient and easy now. And really the epitome of convenient music are these streaming services, Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, those sorts of things, where you've got the entire catalog at your fingertips. And it doesn't cost you any more or any less based on what you want to listen to, right? It's just all you can eat. You're paying your $10 a month, something like that, and listen as much as you want. You can get curated music, like, you're listening to a radio station. You can listen to an entire artist catalog, an album at a time, just the singles, whatever you want. And in some ways, streaming music services, because they're so convenient, I think have commoditized music, right? And I kind of got on this in that previous episode. I'll include a link to that up there in case you want to check that one out. It makes it so convenient, so easy that you don't think about it, right? It becomes background noise. It just becomes another thing that you always have going on while you're doing something else, right? Just like driving in the car, we've had music in cars for forever. Almost, like decades upon decades, we've had music in the car. Obviously, your focus when you're in the car is going to be driving the car. And the music is there as kind of background noise, maybe something to break up the monotony of driving, especially if you're doing like a long trip or whatever, you're just going down the freeway. It gets boring. The music is there. We've been seeing the same thing with a lot of other stuff. You see people walking around, running errands, doing their shopping, going from place to place with headphones on. They're not sitting there focusing on the music. They're just using it as background noise, as a distraction from the monotony. What's really interesting, though, is we've seen this major resurgence in vinyl records. And I think there are actually a few reasons why this is. There have been a number of articles that I've read that kind of talk about this topic over like the last year or so. So it's not just, one source of information claiming this. It's multiple reports from multiple countries. I've even read some articles from the UK where they talk about this. And clearly, streaming music continues to do really, really well in terms of where the revenue from pre-recorded music comes from. And that makes a lot of sense because for many people, it's actually a really good value, right? But vinyl records have done surprisingly well in the last couple of years, and they continue to seem to do well and grow even more. In fact, one report that I read from early of December 2016 said that at least in the UK, vinyl record sales were higher than sales of digital albums, right? So traditional digital music sources like the iTunes Music Store or, Amazon, buying MP3s from Amazon, that sort of thing, actually more money came from selling physical vinyl records than it did from selling copies of digital music. That's really interesting and really big. I mean, that's huge, especially considering how dominant digital music sales have been in the last decade and a half. CD sales aren't down for the count by any means, but really it's considering how much of a niche vinyl is, at least conceptually, you just don't expect that many people to be getting into it, but these numbers indicate otherwise. So what's going on with that? Why are people getting into it? Obviously, I'm going to be going back to one of almost a trope for these podcasts, and of course, that's going to be nostalgia. I think a lot of the sales are going to people who grew up listening to vinyl. And of course, eventually they grew out of vinyl just because better options became available. CDs were definitely more convenient. It was just better technology, moving on to digital music, that sort of thing. But they felt nostalgic for it, and you don't have to be old to feel nostalgic for things. I grew up listening to records. I mean, granted, I quickly got into the CD era when I, was able to afford buying CDs. But as a little kid, my first music playback device that I owned was a record player. And I remember going to the record store when the record store actually was a record store. They sold, vinyl, and picking up singles, for $1 each or whatever, saving my allowance to buy music like that. And I'll admit, I'm going out and buying vinyl again now. If you follow my Twitter, every once in a while I'll post a picture or talk about it, stuff that I've been picking up. And it's fun, and the nostalgia of it it's fun. It brings you back to better memories, which, talking about human memory, is probably a topic best served for another podcast. But it brings you back to a time you fondly remember, and you kind of still have that muscle memory of what it's like to deal with a record, put it on the turntable and deal with the needle and all that stuff. So there's of course the nostalgia angle. But what's really interesting is a lot of the vinyl that's being sold isn't like reissues of old music or used copies of vinyl. A lot of it is actually brand new issues of modern music. All the vinyl that I've bought in the last year has actually all been new. Brand new records, shrink wrapped, sealed, and of new music, new albums that you can get, digitally that just came out. So there's something else going on. It's not just the nostalgia angle of, I remember listening to this particular song or this particular album when I was a kid. It's getting back into that groove of just listening to vinyl again. I think there could also be that angle of people want to enjoy the music again, Yes, for people who didn't grow up listening to vinyl, it's a novel experience, and novelty can often sell things. People buy into it to experience something new that they never have before. But I think it's really just potentially a rubber band effect, right? Or an additional way to think about music. Streaming, it's gotten potentially so far to the point where it really just is noise to people. And maybe people are realizing that, and they're not necessarily giving up on streaming. I don't think so at all. The numbers certainly don't suggest that. But I think potentially some of them are making a concerted effort to just sit down and enjoy music. And the act of listening to a vinyl record is really conducive to that. It's not a passive act, right? You don't, to listen to vinyl versus other media, it's not just click a button. It's not just, push a button on a thing and then you're done with music. It's more involved than that. You've got to care for this record, right? It gets dirty. It can get scratched. It can get damaged somewhat easily. You need to take care of it. And it takes some effort to play it. You have to get it out of its sleeve. You have to put it on the turntable and deal with all that. Halfway through it, you've got to flip the album over, that kind of thing. So it's not really very conducive to, well, let me just go put a record on and then get to work for a couple hours. No, I mean, within half an hour, you're going to be getting back up, flipping the record again. So I think a lot of people are actually really kind of getting back into it again, where they're sitting there and listening to music becomes a primary active activity for them, which I think is really good, because that may spawn more creativity within music. It may signal that it's not such a consumer, I don't want to say consumer thing. It's just not a trivial thing. You know, a lot of times it seems that music is really trivial, and a lot of bad, in quotes, bad music comes out just because, you know, it's trivial to make bad music. But I think if artists realize, and the market realizes, that there's money to be made from people who want to sit and really enjoy music, I think it'll respond. And there certainly is money to be made considering the expense of vinyl. All these new vinyl records, they go for a lot more than an equivalent digital download or even a CD goes for. Some of them are, you know, pretty reasonably priced, but, you know, a lot of vinyl records cost that $20 to $30 US kind of range. Sometimes they're really nice and they'll throw in a code in the package for a free copy of the digital version of that album. And I think that's a fantastic way to do it. Absolutely fantastic way to do it. Get people to buy the vinyl copy of it so they have that physical, and then still give them that convenience factor of the digital file so they can play them in the car, that sort of thing. The other thing that may also be coming into play here is, and maybe tying into that whole enjoying music aspect, is the concept of millennials. Now, we've talked about labeling people. It's been quite a while. That's a video from a long time ago. And the dangers of labeling people and all that, and generalizing and stereotyping and that. But a lot of people, you know, have generalized the millennials as being more interested in experiences than just buying stuff. You know, that buying stuff was something that prior generations was big into. You know, buying a house in the suburbs, you know, buying a couple of cars, and, you know, buying the furniture and appliances and just crap, right? And supposedly millennials are more into, you know, renting things, living in more urban areas. They're not interested as much like in cars. They'd rather just take the bus or the train or walk. They'd rather spend their money on experiences, you know, taking trips, taking vacations, seeing the world. And even if they're not going out somewhere, they'd rather have an experience. You know, they supposedly they go out to eat more often. They try new restaurants and new bars and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, maybe there may be a kernel of truth to that. I'm not going to generalize and say, yeah, that's the way it is, because my age makes me potentially be a millennial, but I don't necessarily agree with all of those things. You know, I don't necessarily do all those supposed things that millennials do. But I think there could be a kernel of truth to that. And vinyl records actually would make sense with that still. Yeah, you're buying stuff, and supposedly millennials don't like really to buy stuff, but more than just a thing you're buying. You're not just buying the record, you're buying the experience. You're not just buying the experience of the music, you're buying the experience of playing the music, right? That whole sit down and actively listen to it, have to care for the record and all that. And that may very well play into the supposed stereotype of what millennials want. Maybe it's a hearkening back to what their parents did too. I will admit that there is some draw to being curious about stuff you didn't grow up with. You know, how often do people listen to music that is older than they are? That's actually pretty common. I mean, there's people my age that, you know, listen to music from the 60s. I mean, hell, I like listening to Hendrix, and he was dead before I was born. So there's that concept of maybe even not actively thinking it, but kind of wanting to get in touch with an older generation and experiencing the things they did. Vinyl records could tie well into that too. I think one of the biggest questions is what kind of momentum does this have behind it? It's obviously been growing for the past couple of years, so it's certainly not a quick, flash in the pan kind of fad where it came back for a couple of months and everyone got into it real big and then it crashed and nobody cares anymore. This has been building for a while, and I suspect it'll continue to build for a while. But I haven't made up my mind yet as to whether I think this is going to be something that'll die out within, another couple of years, or if we're actually going to see this continue for a decade or longer. I'm just not sure. I think there's a lot of unknowns about that really can't necessarily say how well this is going to, how this is going to play out, how well it's going to do long term. But in any event, I actually really like it. On a personal level, it's given me an excuse and a reminder and an impetus to go back through all the old vinyl that I have and listen to it again. It's also given me an impetus to go out and pick up new vinyl, whether it's vinyl of music that I already have, like on CD or whatever, but, just for fun, let's listen to it on vinyl, or picking up brand new music that I've never listened to before. It's an album I've always wanted to pick up, but hey, if I'm going to spend the money, might as well buy it on vinyl. Why not? I think it's a fun experience. Is it going to be the end-all be-all of listening to music? No, absolutely not. I think a lot of the people, if not most of the people who buy vinyl, also have, streaming music subscriptions. I think this is just a supplement to the way people continue to listen to music and how that will evolve. But I think it's fun. And of all the kind of retro mediums that could come back, vinyl, I think, is probably the best one. I think it gives you the most interesting experience. And there's kind of a sense of wonder in a way to it. In that, a lot of us, we've been surrounded by technology for so long, we're just used to computers and digital, just the concept of digital. And that it makes a lot of sense, and it's really easy for us to conceptualize like what an MP3 file is. It's a file that's full of ones and zeros, and an algorithm knows how to take those ones and zeros and turn them into music and play them. That's, if you're surrounded by digital technology for most of, if not all your life, that's really easy to just kind of understand and accept. Vinyl records in some ways have kind of this interesting sense of wonder to them, in that there's nothing digital about them at all. It's this concept of this tiny groove on this piece of vinyl, and the groove is so small you can't really see the detail, but the shape of that groove is what produces the music. And this tiny little diamond rides around in that groove over and over in a circle and is able to make this sound that is actually really decent. Like, I'm not going to get into the argument of whether vinyl sounds better than CDs or whatever, because I'm not getting into that argument. That's bad news. I'd be, I don't want to get into that argument. Anyway, so it's just, when you're so used to digital and understanding the capabilities of computing and that it can pretty much do anything these days, right? There is, I think, this genuine sense of wonder about how relatively archaic vinyl records are, yet how well they work. Just how good of a job they're able to do. And they're so old. It's not a modern thing. Vinyl records weren't invented using computers. We didn't use computers to invent vinyl records. All of that was done, pencil and paper, and people just thinking real hard and doing the math by hand and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of amazing. So maybe all that plays into why vinyl's doing well. I don't know. I'm just sharing my thoughts. As always, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I just want you to think. That's the point behind these podcasts. I just want you to think and make up your own mind. I'm just trying to give you some food for thought. So anyway, I'm curious as to your thoughts. Have you started buying vinyl again? Are you big into it or not? Do you think it's just a short fad and whatever? If you do buy vinyl, are you big into the newer stuff, or are you going back and trying to pick up older music again to kind of get back in touch with stuff you used to listen to? Be sure to shout out all that down in the comments below. I'm curious as to what you think. Of course, I'm also soliciting suggestions and feedback for future podcast topics. So if there's any particular topic that you have in mind that you think would work well in one of these podcasts, be sure to hit me up down in the comments, or on Twitter works as well. If you liked the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.